I've seen many acts of courage in my life, but this one, this simple choice made by a 12-year-old boy, still brings tears to my eyes whenever I think about it. It wasn't a grand gesture that made national headlines. It wasn't a moment of physical bravery that saved someone from danger. It was quieter than that, more profound, and it started with mockery that echoed through the school hallways. Jackson Mills, 12, a lanky kid with sandy brown hair and freckles scattered across his nose and cheeks. Maple Creek Middle School was buzzing with excitement that Monday morning. The hallways were filled with students proudly wearing their new school uniforms, navy blue polo shirts with the school crest embroidered on the chest, paired with khaki pants or skirts. The school board had implemented a uniform policy starting that semester, and nearly everyone had complied. Nearly everyone, except Jackson. He walked through those hallways in a plain white t-shirt and jeans. His shoulders were hunched slightly, but his eyes remained steady and focused straight ahead. The whispers started immediately. Teachers gave him disapproving looks, and students pointed and snickered behind their hands. By lunchtime, Jackson had been sent to the principal's office twice and had endured countless comments from classmates questioning if his family was too poor to afford the uniform. "Hey, Goodwill shopper," called Marcus, one of the more popular 8th graders, as Jackson made his way to the cafeteria. "Did your mom forget to do laundry for a whole month?" Laughter rippled through the group of students nearby. Jackson kept walking, his expression unchanging. "Maybe he doesn't know what a uniform looks like," another voice chimed in. "Or maybe his parents can't read the school notices," added someone else, triggering another wave of laughter. Each word increased the tension. Each laugh made the air thicker with cruelty. And as Jackson sat alone at a cafeteria table, I noticed something that would have been easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. His eyes kept drifting to the cafeteria entrance as if he were waiting for someone. That someone was Oliver Matthews. Oliver was also in 7th grade, a boy carrying much more weight than most kids his age. He had missed the first day of school, and the second, and now, on this third day as Jackson sat watching the door, I began to understand that these two facts might be connected, but what no one expected was what would happen next. The cafeteria door swung open, and there stood Oliver, his face flushed red, his breathing heavy, and his eyes darting anxiously around the room. He wore the standard uniform, but it was noticeably tighter than those of the other students. The navy polo stretched across his chest and stomach, the buttons of the khaki pants straining slightly. Even from where I stood, I could see that the uniform was at least one size too small. The cafeteria, which had been buzzing with conversation and laughter, fell into an uncomfortable silence as Oliver entered. Then came the inevitable whispers, followed by barely suppressed giggles. Someone made a joke just loud enough to be heard, and several students burst into open laughter. Oliver froze, clutching his lunch tray so tightly his knuckles turned white. His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, it seemed like he might turn around and flee. That's when Jackson stood up. He walked directly to Oliver, took his arm gently, and guided him to his table. The two sat down together, and Jackson immediately started talking to Oliver as if they were the only two people in the room, as if the stares and whispers didn't exist. It was in that moment that everything changed. During the lunch period, a teacher approached their table and once again reminded Jackson about the uniform violation. That's when Jackson finally broke his silence on the matter. "With all due respect, Ms. Peterson," he said, his voice steady despite being heard by nearly everyone in the now quieter cafeteria. "I won't be wearing the uniform this week." "That's not how it works, Jackson," the teacher replied. "This isn't optional." "I know," Jackson said. "You can keep sending me to the principal's office. I understand there will be consequences." Ms. Peterson looked confused. "I don't understand why you're choosing this battle, Jackson. You've never been a troublemaker before." Jackson glanced at Oliver, who was staring down at his untouched food, then back at the teacher. "It's not a battle," he said quietly. "It's a choice." The teacher sighed and walked away, clearly deciding to continue this conversation elsewhere. But her departure didn't end the mystery. It deepened it. What was Jackson doing? Why was he willing to face detention, calls home to his parents, and potential suspension over something as simple as wearing a school uniform? The truth would emerge later that day, in the most unexpected way. During final period, the principal, Mr. Daniels, came to Jackson's classroom and asked to speak with him in the hallway. Everyone expected Jackson to return with his head down, properly chastised. Instead, 5 minutes later, Mr. Daniels returned to the classroom alone and asked Ms. Johnson, the English teacher, if he could address the class. The principal rarely entered classrooms, so his presence immediately commanded attention. He cleared his throat and surveyed the room. "I want to talk to you all about courage," he began, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "Real courage isn't about physical strength or bravado. Sometimes, it's about quiet choices that prioritize others above yourself." The students exchanged confused glances. "Jackson Mills will not be returning to class today. He's been given permission to go home early. But before he left, he shared something with me that I think you all should hear with his permission." The classroom was completely silent now. Last week, before school started, Jackson and Oliver went shopping for school uniforms together. Oliver's family could only afford to purchase one uniform set, and unfortunately, the store didn't have his size in stock. The only option was a uniform that was too small, one that Oliver was terrified to wear because he absolutely knew that he would be teased about how it fit. Mr. Daniels paused, looking around the room. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Oliver was so anxious that he missed the first 2 days of school. He couldn't bear the thought of facing all of you in a uniform that would only draw attention to his weight. Jackson knew this, and he made a decision. He told Oliver that he wouldn't wear his uniform either, so that Oliver wouldn't be the only one breaking the dress code. He promised Oliver that he would take the attention, the disciplinary actions, and the mockery instead. The silence in the room was deafening. Today, when Oliver finally found the courage to come to school, Jackson kept his promise, and he intended to keep it all week, or for however long it took until the properly sized uniforms that Jackson's parents ordered for Oliver arrived. Mr. Daniels looked around the room again, making eye contact with several students who had been the loudest with their teasing earlier. "That, students, is what we call integrity. That is what we call friendship. That is what we call courage." The principal's words hung in the air. No one spoke. No one even seemed to breathe. "I've exempted Jackson from the uniform requirement for the remainder of this week, and I've exempted Oliver as well, until his new uniforms arrive. But I want you all to think about what happened here today. Think about how quickly we judge others without knowing their stories. Think about how our words and laughter can cause pain we don't intend. And think about what true friendship looks like." With that, he nodded to Ms. Johnson and left the classroom. For the remaining 20 minutes of the school day, the teacher didn't even attempt to return to the lesson plan. There was a different kind of education happening in that room, one far more valuable than anything in the curriculum. But what happened in the days that followed was even more remarkable. The next morning, Oliver came to school wearing his too tight uniform again, but with his head a little higher. Jackson was back in his regular clothes as the principal had permitted, but they weren't the only ones out of uniform anymore. At least 15 other students had chosen to wear regular clothes that day, not in rebellion against the rules, but in solidarity with Oliver. By lunchtime, the number had grown to over 30. Students who had never spoken to Oliver before sat with him and Jackson at lunch. A few apologized for laughing the day before. Marcus, the 8th grader who had been one of the loudest mockers, approached their table awkwardly. "Hey," he said, addressing both boys but looking mostly at the floor. "My mom's pretty good with a sewing machine. She said she might be able to let out your uniform a bit if you want, until the new ones come in." Oliver looked up, surprised. "Really? That would be amazing." Marcus nodded, finally meeting Oliver's eyes. "Cool. Just bring it tomorrow and I'll take it to her." It was a small gesture, but it represented something much larger, a shift in understanding and empathy. The story spread throughout the school, then to parents, and then to the local community. What had started as one boy's quiet decision to stand by his friend had sparked conversations about kindness, about bullying, and about the courage it takes to be a true friend. 3 days later, the school received a delivery, not just the properly sized uniforms for Oliver that Jackson's family had ordered, but an additional 3 sets, anonymously donated. The next day, a local clothing store sent enough uniforms for every student in the school who might need them, eliminating any financial barriers for families who were struggling. At an emergency school board meeting, the uniform policy was amended to include provisions for financial assistance and to ensure proper sizing was available for all body types. The principal instituted a new program focused on empathy and kindness, inspired directly by Jackson's actions. And Oliver, the boy who had been too afraid to come to school, transformed over those weeks. Having Jackson stand up for him, and then seeing others follow suit, gave him a confidence that no one had seen before. He started participating more in class, joined the school's science club, and even volunteered to help tutor younger students in math, a subject where he excelled. As for Jackson, he never spoke much about what he'd done. When a local newspaper wanted to interview him about his act of kindness, he insisted that Oliver be included, and he spent most of the interview talking about Oliver's strengths and talents, rather than his own actions. That was just who Jackson was, someone who saw the best in others and was willing to stand up for them, even when it cost him something. The ripples from Jackson's choice continued to spread outward. The school became known in the district for its emphasis on social-emotional learning and its anti-bullying initiatives. Teachers reported that students were more likely to intervene when they saw others being teased or left out. Parents noticed changes in how their children talked about differences among their peers. But the most powerful change was perhaps the least visible, the shift that happened inside each person who heard the story. It raised an uncomfortable but important question. Would I have had the courage to do what Jackson did? Would I have been willing to stand alone, to face mockery and punishment, to protect a friend? For many of us, the honest answer might be no, and that realization can be the beginning of transformation. 2 years later, when Jackson and Oliver graduated from middle school, Oliver gave a speech as the class representative. He had lost some weight due to joining the swim team, encouraged by Jackson, who joined with him despite not being particularly athletic. But he was still a big kid. The difference was, it no longer defined him in the eyes of his peers. In his speech, Oliver didn't directly mention the uniform incident, but he talked about the power of friendship and how a single act of courage can change the trajectory of someone's life. We all have the capacity for kindness, he said, his voice strong and confident, so different from the frightened boy who had stood at the cafeteria entrance 2 years earlier. We all have the power to stand up for each other. Sometimes, that's all it takes to change someone's world. Jackson sat in the audience, smiling proudly at his friend. He never sought recognition for what he'd done, but the impact of his choice was evident in the confident young man speaking at the podium. This story reminds me that heroism doesn't always look like we expect it to. It doesn't always involve physical danger or dramatic rescues. Sometimes it looks like a 12-year-old boy in a plain white t-shirt, willing to be different, willing to be uncomfortable, willing to be mocked, all to make sure his friend didn't have to face those things alone. It reminds me that courage is a choice we make every day in moments big and small. It's the choice to put someone else's needs before our own comfort. It's the choice to stand up rather than stand by. It's the choice to be the friend that we all hope to have when we're at our most vulnerable. What Jackson did changed Oliver's life, but it also changed the school, the community, and anyone who hears this story, including me, including you, because we all have opportunities to be like Jackson. Every day presents moments where we can choose courage over comfort, kindness over fitting in. We don't have to wait for big moments or dramatic situations. We can choose to stand with someone who feels alone. We can choose to speak up when others are silent. We can choose to see beyond appearances to the person underneath. And those choices, those small, daily acts of courage, have the power to transform lives in ways we might never fully understand. The uniform incident at Maple Creek Middle School happened almost 10 years ago now. Jackson and Oliver both went on to college, Jackson studying education with plans to become a teacher, and Oliver pursuing engineering. They've remained friends through the years, their bond forged in that pivotal moment when one friend refused to let the other face humiliation alone. Their story has been shared in anti-bullying campaigns and character education programs. It's been used to teach children and adults alike about empathy, integrity, and the true meaning of friendship. And while the details might vary slightly in each telling, the essential truth remains the same. One person's courage can ignite courage in others. We often underestimate the power of our choices. We tell ourselves that we're just one person, that our actions don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Jackson's story challenges that assumption. It shows us that a single act of kindness, a single stand against injustice, can create ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. So the next time you witness someone being treated unfairly, or you see someone struggling alone, remember Jackson Mills and his simple, powerful choice. Remember that you have the same capacity for courage. Remember that you too can be the person who stands up, speaks out, and changes a life. Because in the end, that's how the world changes. Not all at once, but one brave choice at a time. As I look back on this story, I'm reminded of something Mr. Daniels, the principal, said in a follow-up assembly a month after the incident. He gathered all the students together and spoke about the changes he'd observed in the school community. What happened here wasn't just about uniforms, he said. It was about seeing beyond the surface. It was about recognizing that each of us has battles that others know nothing about. It was about choosing to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. He paused, looking out at the sea of young faces. The most important uniform we can wear is invisible, he continued. It's the character we build through the choices we make when those choices are difficult. It's the integrity we demonstrate when no one is watching. It's the kindness we show to those who need it most. Those words stuck with me, just as Jackson's actions did. They remind me that what matters most isn't what we wear on the outside, but who we choose to be on the inside. They remind me that true courage isn't about fearlessness. It's about feeling the fear and making the right choice anyway. Jackson felt fear that day. He knew he would face consequences for breaking the rules. He knew his classmates might mock him. He knew teachers might be disappointed in him. But he chose Oliver's well-being over his own comfort. He chose friendship over fitting in. He chose courage over conformity. And in doing so, he taught an entire community what it means to be brave. There's a postscript to this story that I learned only recently. During their senior year of high school, Oliver saved Jackson's life. They were hiking with friends when Jackson slipped on loose rocks and fell down a steep embankment, hitting his head and falling unconscious near the edge of a swift-moving river. Oliver, despite his size making the descent difficult, was the first one down the slope, the first to reach Jackson, the first to administer first aid, and the one who carried Jackson on his back up the steep incline to where emergency services could reach them. When interviewed about it afterward, Oliver shrugged off the praise. Jackson never hesitated to help me when I needed it, he said simply. How could I do any less for him? That's the power of friendship. That's the power of standing with someone in their moment of vulnerability. It creates a bond that endures, a loyalty that doesn't calculate cost, a love that acts instinctively to protect and support. In a world that often seems divided and self-centered, stories like Jackson and Oliver's shine like beacons, reminding us of what's possible when we choose compassion over convenience, empathy over indifference. They remind us that heroism isn't reserved for special people or extraordinary circumstances. It's available to each of us, every day, in the choices we make. I share this story not just because it's touching or inspiring, though it is both of those things. I share it because it calls us to reflection, to examination of our own choices. It asks us uncomfortable but necessary questions. Who am I standing up for? Whose burden am I helping to carry? Where am I choosing courage over comfort? These aren't easy questions. They're not meant to be. They're meant to challenge us, to push us toward growth and greater awareness of our impact on others. Jackson didn't set out to be a hero or to start a movement. He simply saw his friend suffering and decided to do something about it. He made a choice that any of us could make in our own ways, in our own circumstances. And that's what makes this story so powerful. It's not about extraordinary people doing impossible things. It's about ordinary people doing the right thing, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. As I reflect on Jackson and Oliver's journey from bullied middle schoolers to confident young men making a difference in their communities, I'm struck by how the smallest choices can alter the trajectory of our lives and the lives of those around us. Jackson chose to stand with Oliver. Oliver chose to find his voice. Marcus chose to offer help instead of mockery. Mr. Daniels chose to see beyond rule-breaking to the heart of what education should be. The school community chose to transform rather than resist. Each choice built upon the others, creating something beautiful from what began as something painful. And now the choice passes to us, to you, and to me. What will we do with this story? How will it change the way we see the people around us? How will it influence the decisions we make when faced with moments of moral challenge? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're invitations to become part of a different story, a story where kindness triumphs over cruelty, where courage overcomes fear, where friendship defeats isolation. It's a story that's being written every day, in schools and workplaces, in neighborhoods and communities around the world. It's being written by people who may never make headlines or receive awards, but whose choices create ripples of change that transform the world, one relationship at a time. People like Jackson, people like Oliver, people like you. The bell rang, signaling the end of the assembly where Mr. Daniels had spoken about the changes in the school. Students gathered their things, chatting as they prepared to move to their next classes. Amid the noise and movement, a sixth grader approached Jackson, who was now in eighth grade. The younger boy looked nervous, shifting from foot to foot as Jackson noticed him. "Hey," Jackson said with a friendly smile. "What's up?" The boy started, then took a deep breath. "I just wanted to say thank you for what you did last year for Oliver." Jackson looked surprised. "Oh, you weren't even at this school then, were you?" The boy shook his head. "No, but everyone knows the story. And, well, I'm new here. But at my old school, I was the kid that everyone picked on. For being small, for my glasses, for liking to read instead of play sports. It was really bad." Jackson's expression softened. "I'm sorry that happened to you. It's okay, I mean, it's not okay, but when I heard about this school, about what happened with you and Oliver, I actually asked my mom if we could move to this district." The boy smiled shyly. "And now we're here, and it's different. People are different here, because of what you did." Jackson seemed at a loss for words. "Anyway," the boy continued, "I just wanted you to know that it mattered, that it still matters." With that, the younger student hurried away, leaving Jackson standing there watching him go with a mixture of surprise and something deeper, perhaps the first real understanding of just how far the ripples of his choice had spread. That's the thing about courage and kindness. We rarely get to see the full impact of our actions. We make a choice in a moment, and that choice sends ripples outward in ways we could never predict. Those ripples touch lives we may never meet, change stories we may never hear, create possibilities we could never imagine. Jackson couldn't have known that his decision would eventually bring a bullied boy from another district to find refuge in his school. He couldn't have known that teachers would use his example in character education lessons for years to come. He couldn't have known that Oliver would go from being afraid to enter the cafeteria to being a confident public speaker and leader. He just knew that his friend was suffering, and he could do something about it. That's the beautiful simplicity at the heart of this story. It doesn't require grand gestures or elaborate plans. It doesn't demand exceptional talent or unique opportunity. It asks only for the willingness to see another's pain and the courage to stand in solidarity with them. It's been said that courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. Jackson felt fear when he chose to break the uniform policy. Oliver felt fear when he finally came to school in his ill-fitting clothes. Marcus felt fear when he approached to offer help after being part of the problem. The sixth-grade boy felt fear when he approached Jackson to express his gratitude, but each of them chose to act despite their fear. And in doing so, they became part of a larger story of transformation and hope. As I think about this story's meaning for my own life, I'm challenged to consider the ways I might be called to similar courage. Where are the Oliver Matthews in my world? The people who need someone to stand beside them in their vulnerability. Where are the opportunities for me to choose integrity over conformity, kindness over convenience, courage over comfort? And I'm reminded that we never know when our choices might be the turning point in someone else's story. We never know when our willingness to stand up, speak out, or simply show up might be the catalyst for change that extends far beyond our vision. That's both a responsibility and a privilege. It means that each day presents us with opportunities to make a difference, not through grand, heroic actions, but through simple choices to see others, to value them, and to stand with them when standing alone would be easier. Jackson's choice reminds us that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply refuse to leave someone to face difficulty alone. He didn't solve Oliver's problem entirely. He couldn't make the uniform fit properly or stop all the teasing immediately, but he could ensure that Oliver didn't have to face those challenges in isolation. He could share the burden. He could say, through his actions, "You are not alone in this." And sometimes, that's enough to change everything. As the years passed and the story of Jackson and Oliver became part of the school's cultural memory, something interesting happened. New students would arrive at Maple Creek Middle School having already heard some version of what happened. Like folklore passed down through generations, the tale took on symbolic significance. Teachers noticed that when conflicts arose, students would sometimes ask each other, "What would Jackson do?" It became shorthand for choosing kindness over cruelty, courage over conformity. On the 5th anniversary of the uniform incident, the school dedicated a small garden area with a simple plaque that read, "Courage is contagious." No names were mentioned. Jackson had specifically requested that, but everyone knew what it meant. It became a place where students would sometimes sit when they needed to make difficult decisions or when they felt alone. One afternoon, a teacher happened upon a 7th-grade girl sitting alone in the garden, crying quietly. The teacher sat beside her silently, offering presents without intrusion. After a few minutes, the girl spoke. "I know I need to be like Jackson," she said, wiping her eyes. "My friend is being bullied online, and everyone's joining in or just watching. I know I should stand up for her, but I'm scared they'll turn on me too." The teacher nodded. "That is scary," she agreed. "Being courageous often is. But it's the right thing to do, isn't it?" The girl asked, looking up. "What do you think?" The teacher replied gently. The girl was quiet for a moment, then straightened her shoulders. I think my friend shouldn't have to face this alone." She stood up, gave the plaque a small touch with her fingertips, and walked back toward the school with new determination in her step. This is how legacies of courage are built, not through monuments or medals, but through stories that inspire action, that remind us of who we can be at our best, that challenge us to live up to the example set before us. Jackson and Oliver never knew about that moment in the garden. They never knew about countless other moments when their story gave someone the courage to make a difficult choice. They never knew all the ways in which their experience helped shape a more compassionate community. But that's often how positive change works. We don't always get to see the full impact of our actions. We don't always know who might be watching, learning, finding courage through our example. We simply make the best choices we can in the moments presented to us, trusting that those choices matter beyond what we can see. As I come to the end of sharing Jackson and Oliver's story with you, I'm aware that the power of this narrative doesn't lie in its conclusion. It lies in its continuation, in how it lives on, in the actions it inspires, in the questions it raises, in the possibilities it illuminates. Their story reminds us that we all have the capacity to be upstanders rather than bystanders. We all have opportunities to choose courage over comfort, kindness over convenience, integrity over conformity. We all have moments when our choices can make a profound difference in someone else's life. And while we may never know the full extent of our impact, we can trust that acts of courage and kindness are never wasted. They change us. They change others. They change the environments we inhabit. They become part of a larger narrative of human goodness that counters the cynicism and selfishness too often highlighted in our world. In the end, Jackson's choice to stand with Oliver wasn't just about a school uniform. It was about human dignity. It was about the kind of community we want to create. It was about the kind of people we want to be. And those are choices we all face, every day. So let me ask you, who needs you to stand with them today? Whose burden could you help carry? Where is courage calling you to act? These questions aren't just rhetorical. They're invitations to become part of a different kind of story. A story where kindness prevails, where courage is contagious, where friendship transforms lives. A story that continues with you. When I first heard about Jackson and Oliver, I was moved by the simplicity and power of their story, but I also wondered how much of it was true and how much had been embellished over time, as stories often are when they take on the quality of modern parables. So I decided to find out. It took some effort, but I eventually located Jackson Mills, now in his mid-20s and true to his childhood ambitions, working as a middle school teacher in a different state. When I reached out and asked if he would be willing to talk about what happened that day at Maple Creek, he seemed surprised that anyone still remembered. "It wasn't really that big a deal," he said when we finally spoke. "I just didn't want Oliver to have to go through that alone." That humility, I discovered, was characteristic of Jackson. He downplayed his role in what happened, crediting Oliver for finding the courage to come to school, crediting Mr. Daniels for understanding the situation, crediting his classmates for joining in solidarity. "To be honest," he told me, "I was scared that day. I knew I was breaking the rules. I knew people would make fun of me. I knew my parents would probably get mad. But I was more scared of what would happen if Oliver had to face all that alone. When I asked him how the experience had shaped his life, he thought for a moment. "I think it taught me that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it," he said. "And it showed me the kind of teacher I wanted to be someday. Someone who looks beyond behavior to see what's really going on with kids. Someone who values character above conformity." I asked if he and Oliver were still in touch. Jackson smiled. "We don't talk every day or anything, but yeah, we're still friends. He's doing amazing things in engineering, designing accessibility tools for people with mobility issues. I'm not surprised. He always had a big heart and a brilliant mind." Before we ended our conversation, I asked Jackson if he had any message for people who might hear his story. He thought for a long moment. "I guess I'd say that we all have chances every day to stand up for someone, to make a difference. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to make a big splash. Sometimes it's just about being there, saying you're not alone, showing someone that they matter." He paused, then added, "And I'd say that we never really know the impact our choices might have." That day, I was just thinking about Oliver. I wasn't trying to change the school or start some kind of movement. I was just trying to be a good friend. But it turned into something bigger than I could have imagined. As I reflected on our conversation, I was struck by how closely the real Jackson matched the character in the story that had been passed down. The details might have been polished with telling and retelling, but the essence remained true. A boy who saw his friend suffering and decided to stand with him regardless of the personal cost. And isn't that the heart of all great stories of courage? Not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. Not extraordinary abilities, but extraordinary choices. Not seeking recognition, but seeking to do what's right. These are the stories that change us. These are the examples that inspire us. These are the moments that remind us of our own capacity for courage and kindness. So as you go forward from this story, carry with you the memory of Jackson Mills in his plain white t-shirt, standing beside his friend when standing alone would have been easier. Let it be a reminder that you too have the power to make choices that might become part of a larger story of courage and compassion. Because in the end, that's how change happens. One brave choice at a time. One brave choice at a time. That phrase has stayed with me since my conversation with Jackson. It's become a kind of mantra, a reminder that transforming our communities and our world doesn't require grand gestures or dramatic actions. It requires ordinary people making slightly braver choices day after day. It requires seeing the Oliver Matthews in our world, the people who are vulnerable, excluded, or struggling. It requires being willing to stand with them, even when it comes at a cost. It requires trusting that those choices matter, that they create ripples far beyond what we can see. I think about the 6th grader who moved districts because he heard about a school where kindness was valued. I think about the girl in the garden finding courage to stand up against cyberbullying. I think about Mr. Daniels recognizing that some lessons are more important than strict adherence to rules. I think about all the ways a simple choice to stand with someone in their moment of vulnerability can transform not just their life, but an entire community. And I wonder, what brave choice is waiting for me today? What brave choice is waiting for you? Perhaps it's speaking up when others are silent. Perhaps it's reaching out when someone is isolated. Perhaps it's standing firm in your values when pressure to conform is strong. Whatever it is, I hope Jackson and Oliver's story gives you the courage to make that choice. I hope it reminds you that you're not alone in wanting to create a world where kindness prevails over cruelty, where courage is contagious, where friendship has the power to transform lives. Because in the end, that's the world we all want to live in. And creating it begins with one brave choice at a time. So what will your brave choice be today? Take a deep breath and reflect on this story of unexpected courage. If it touched something in you, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment about what part resonated most with you, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the extraordinary impact of ordinary courage. Because in a world that often feels divided and difficult, we need these reminders of our capacity for kindness and our power to make a difference. We need to hear about the Jackson Mills among us, the people who choose to stand up, speak out, and change lives through simple acts of courage and compassion. And most importantly, we need to be reminded that we can be those people too, one brave choice at a time.